The opportunity is that the humans can become immortal. We have an opportunity to taste true life. And will we go about things our way, or will we trust the things that God has put forth?
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Theology Re-Examined. Today I have with me Hakeem Bradley. Hakeem, welcome.
Was good. Glad to be here.
So, Hakeem, if you will, just start us off kind of sharing a little bit about who you are, sharing what you're doing, and yeah.
Yeah, a little nutshell. I'm married to a woman named Jasmine. Been married for 7 years almost. We got 2 kids, my son Ezekiel and our daughter Remy. And currently live in Atlanta, Georgia, originally from Philadelphia, but spent half my life in Portland. So I've been all over the continental US, man,
Everywhere.
everywhere. Didn't grow up in the church by any means. Actually grew up pretty hostile to Jesus, Christianity, the Bible, whatever you want to name, but fell in love with Jesus at 17. And I've been on a journey ever since, going through pastoral ministry. And now I work at an organization called BibleProject, where I'm a professional nerd, bro. Like, I read books and write for a living
Yeah.
and study these things that we call the scriptures. And it's hands down a dream come true, to be honest.
Yeah. Is that something well, you said you started following Jesus at 17. Is that something you
Yeah.
kind of knew immediately? I want to spend my life reading books about Jesus and teaching others about it.
Nah, bro. Like I got into the faith, and the first thing I was like, I think I wanna be a youth pastor.
Okay.
And it's because like my youth pastors were like really dope, and I had a couple of them. And I would just see how they operated, see how they treated my peers, see how they navigated caring for people. And I was like, I want to do that. And then they gave me opportunities to teach on a Wednesday night or at like what we call Jesus Pizza at my high school. Get a bunch of students in the room, give them pizza, talk about Jesus, do that every week. And there was like a buzz that I kind of caught, for the lack of a better word, when it comes to teaching. So I was like, oh, this is fun. When you see somebody's light bulbs come on as your light bulbs come on, I was like, I want to do that. But um, as I got older, I realized that I only got into pastoral ministry mainly because it's what people told me that I should do versus me feeling like this is what I think I'm geared for. But I fell in love with the scriptures along the way. And so I picked up Genesis one day and it got weird real fast. Like
Yeah.
by chapter 3, I was like, what is going on here? But I couldn't put it down. And I found myself reading through the entire Hebrew Bible and tapped into the New Testament. And so over time, I'm like, yeah, I wanna help people understand the scriptures as I learn how to understand these texts. So it
Yeah.
wasn't it wasn't that way from the jump, but it is that way now, though. I tell you.
Okay. And are
Yeah,
you in the middle of any type of education? Are you in school right now or?
I am. I am. So I'm currently in a PhD program at an Australian school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in Melbourne. It's crazy, man. Like we all speak the same language, but we don't at the same
We
time. Like the
don't.
dialects are crazy. Um, so yeah, I go to school there. I'm in my second year of my program, so pray for your boy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. And
studying
then
studying New Testament, particularly the Epistle of James.
James. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
it's real
always
good.
my favorite growing up. James 1, 2 through 4 was the one that actually really got me deep into loving this, like loving not just Jesus, or not just like the idea of following a man who
Mm.
believed and taught these type of things,
Yeah,
but also just falling in love with the Bible. I
come on.
remember I started a Bible study and we were going through the book of James. And so because of that, it caused me it made me spend the entire week leading up to that, going hard into just several verses. And the
Yep.
very first one we did was, James 1, 1 through 4. And I just remember spending hours and hours and hours that week immersed in those scriptures
Yeah, yeah.
and finding it to be the most fascinating thing ever. And still to this day, it's like I remember all the Greek words behind it. I remember I could probably stand up and
You
preach
was
the
in it.
entire thing
Yeah.
from memory now. And that was years ago because it was just such a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
So that's a good book to spend your time doing a PhD on.
Listen, man, one quick little nugget I learned about James. So his name is actually Jacob.
Jacobus,
And
yeah.
yeah, Jacobus.
Yo,
And
wait. Okay, I'm gonna cut you off real quick
no, go
because
ahead.
I'm in a fight right now. Not a fight. I'm in a I'm in a really respectable disagreement with my wife
Yeah,
right now about
yeah.
what we should name our first child. I want to
Mm.
name him Iacobus. and nobody, I'm so serious, nobody has sided with me on this, but I've been trying to convince people about,
Mm,
the Jacob and the
yeah,
connections with
yeah.
all this different stuff, and nobody will buy it. But
Hey,
anyways, no,
it would be
go.
it'll be an anomaly
Yeah.
for your child, but I think it is a dope name. But it's interesting that he writes to the 12 tribes of the diaspora. So he's kind of like setting his letter up. When you think about the patriarch, Jacob, in Genesis 49, he's addressing the 12 tribes. He's addressing his 12 sons before he dies. And so what James is doing in this New Testament letter is kind of like a new, how do I say this? He's kind of setting himself up kind of like a patriarchal figure, but for the
Mhm.
messianic body. And so it's like a new Jacob addressing the 12 tribes to bring them back into a unified whole through Messiah Jesus. And so
Mhm.
I was like, oh snap. When I learned that his name was Jacob, I said, yo, like that's significant. And there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there that I think would be fun to talk about another day. But
Dude,
yeah,
yeah.
man,
No, I have so
for
many
sure.
questions that I'm having to refrain from asking right now because it's not what we're here to talk about.
Yeah,
But one other thing I'm curious about. You said you're doing your
yeah.
PhD right now at a place in
hmm
Australia. Where'd you do
hmm
your master's?
So I did my master's at a seminary in Portland called Western Seminary.
Okay,
Finished up a couple years ago and got a master's in biblical and theological studies.
okay,
And
cool.
so, yeah, man, just basic, Bible classes, theological classes, ministerial classes, but the languages was what kind of got my gears running even more. Cause I'm like, all
Okay,
right, Hebrew, Greek. I wish they taught Aramaic, but
really.
I got a couple books back here that I'm trying to lean into. So
Self-taught in the Aramaic.
trying, bro. If you
Okay,
know Hebrew, you can pick up Aramaic pretty easily. So
okay.
yeah, man.
Cool. Awesome. Well,
Indeed.
what we are here to talk about specifically is Genesis.
Yeah.
Genesis as a whole scroll, but also specifically, we wanted to kind of get more into chapters 1 through 4 if we get
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, you had mentioned that was one of the things that originally compelled you to studying the Bible.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us, just in a broad overview, what are some
Yeah.
important things that we need to know about Genesis just as a book?
Yeah. I would say one, Genesis sets up the story for the rest of the Bible in a way that without it, nothing else makes sense. And I mean that from chapter 1 all the way to 50. This entire scroll sets up the story and it sets up for what Jesus will come to do later on in the apostolic community. It's all folded up into these narratives that we find in Genesis. And not only that, but I think Genesis 1 through 4 or 5, you could argue, or 9 or 11, whatever block you want to chop it up in,
Yeah.
that that little block in Genesis is just on repeat over and over and over again throughout the scroll of Genesis and into Exodus, into Leviticus. Now, it's just, I think if you can understand Genesis, you can read the rest of the Bible really well. But it's going to take time to meditate on the patterns and designs in Genesis that sets up the rest of the story. One of my favorite metaphors is I love hip hop. It's like sampling. You know the concept of sampling. Are you familiar with Michael Jackson's music? I always
Yeah.
gotta ask.
I mean,
Okay.
come on.
Hey, dog, listen, bro. I be having to tap in. I'm just saying. So his song, "Human Nature." You familiar with that?
No, not that one.
Ooh, boy.
I
Listen,
need to put it on my list then, huh?
listen. After this, you need to tap in with Human Nature. But
Okay, I will.
for a lot of folks, when you hear that melody, it jumps on, and people are like, "Oh, that's Human Nature. That's from the 1980s." That same melody gets taken and it gets reused in the 1990s by an R&B group called SWV. And all they do, they add a little bass drum in, boop, 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 and they add a couple elements, but it doesn't matter what they added in, you still can hear the original composition from Michael Jackson. And then that melody gets taken into the 2000s with Tyra B, 2010s with Chris Brown, 2020s with Big Sean. And no matter what genre the melody has gone across, no matter what music producers have added to the melody, you still can recognize the original. And just like that with the scriptures, when you hear the key words and themes of Genesis, it doesn't matter if it's the Exodus story, it doesn't matter if it's in Kings, it doesn't matter if it's in Matthew or Revelation. you can still hear the key themes and key words that are being drawn from the Genesis narratives later on. It's like later biblical authors are sampling this scroll in particular in their writings to communicate wisdom messages to the people in
Mm,
their time. And so that's why I think Genesis is the bomb. It's the
yeah.
beginning. It's literally the scroll literally means in the beginning.
Mhm.
So that's a gist off the rip. So
Okay.
that makes
So,
sense.
yeah, of course, of course. What are some of these things that are being sampled in throughout the rest of the Hebrew Bible?
Yeah,
What are a
yeah,
couple of those that we can say, oh, yeah, I see that now, and point those
yeah.
out to us, if you will?
So for example, many people will be familiar with the Garden of Eden story, right?
Hmm.
So in chapter 3, it talks about how the woman saw, keyword saw that the tree was good for making one wise and desirable. She saw that it was good, and then she took the fruit. So saw good, took. Those three words. Let's imagine that they're kind of like melody notes, right? For example,
Okay.
like an A note, C sharp, and an E minor, right? Um, if you read the flood narratives in Genesis 6, it talks about how the sons of God, this is right before Noah pops up on the scene, the sons of God saw the daughters of men as beautiful, but the word beautiful is good,
Good.
and then they take them as wives. So now instead of it being a fruit that is now taken, now it's these daughters of men that are in the slot of the fruit that these sons of God take. And then if you read a little bit more when you get to Genesis 12, this is right after God gives Abram this whole elaborate promise and all of that. And then they go down, him and Sarai go down into Egypt. And Abram starts acting like the snake. He wants to deceive Pharaoh. And so he goes, okay, Sarah, I need you to say you my sister, because if not, they're gonna kill you. They're gonna kill me, sorry, because you fine. So they're
Hmm.
gonna kill me and try to take you. So it says that the Egyptians saw that Sarai was beautiful. It's the same word for good again. And then they took her. So what's the wisdom? What's the message? Why do these same words keep getting used over and over and over again in different narratives? It's to show the wisdom that when human beings take something and they warp, or when we see something that God has made that is a good thing, or is off limits to us, and we warp it in our imagination, and we warp it to our sense of what is good and bad, and then we take it, it never goes well.
Mm.
So basically stay in your lane.
Yeah.
What happens when Adam and Eve eat of the fruit? Things go crazy. What happens when the sons of God leave their domain and start taking human beings as their wives? And it's not like a holy matrimony moment. It's like forceful. It's not a good thing. We get the flood. What happens when Abram sets up his wife to save his own behind? It goes terrible. For who? For the Egyptians. So, anyways, those are some examples that you'll see later on. Or, last one I'll say, David
Mm.
saw Bathsheba and she was beautiful, and
Mhm.
then he sends some servants to go and take her. And
Yeah.
we know how the story goes after that. It doesn't go well. It leads to the death of Uriah. It leads to the tragic death of a baby. It leads to David having a moment where he had to realize, yo, I've committed adultery and I've committed murder, and I have to repent of those things. So
Yeah.
that's an example of when I say sampling in the text. But but there is a twist to those same words that Jesus picks up, and then he uses them in a different way. So excuse me. I would say that's an example. Hopefully that made sense though.
Okay. So you just are gonna tease this out right here about Jesus, and then you're not gonna tell us, huh?
My bad, my bad, my bad. So for example, there's another word in the garden story, right, where the woman takes and then she gives
Mm.
to her husband, and
Mm.
then he eats. And the key words of eating and giving are also keywords that will get used in later stories as well. But when you think about the Last Supper, Jesus takes the bread and he breaks it, and then he gives it. So this is kind of a reversal of what took place in the garden. He does take something and he gives it so that they can eat,
Mm.
but now it's for a return to the Garden of Eden, so to speak, in a metaphoric type of way, versus us being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And I believe, if I remember correctly, the Greek words that are used in the Last Supper narratives for those words of, take, give, and eat are the same Greek words that get used in the Septuagint for the Garden of Eden story. I think.
Mm-hmm.
So don't quote
Yeah.
me on that. Somebody
Yeah.
gonna be like, bro, he was wrong, dog. But if I recall correctly, but I think thematically it's still the boat still sails
Yeah.
in my opinion. So yeah, man.
Yeah, that's good. Any other ones then, as we just stay in this overarching view right now, that you want to point out before we
I,
continue on?
I would say I'll say for right now, we'll let that one rock.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and I'm sure we'll definitely cover something else. Trust me,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
bound to happen.
Of course. So, is there anywhere that you want to go then from there? So, we've gotten a big overarching view. Do you want to touch any more on anything that happens in the latter portion of Genesis, or do you just want to go into, let's talk about Genesis 1?
Um, Man, that's a good question. I would say I think this is helpful to know. At Bible Project, we have this idea of um, hyperlinks and
Mhm.
movements. You know, like when you click on a hyperlink on your browser, it like shoots you to a web page or
Wikipedia.
whatever.
Yeah, they do
Yeah,
that well. Yeah.
yep.
That blue little text everywhere.
Little text, right, with the underline. You click that, it'll send you somewhere else.
Uh-huh.
So what I was just articulating about patterns and keywords and repetition, we call those hyperlinks. So if you click on one that might be used in, let's say, Habakkuk or whatever, it might send you back all the way to Genesis, or it might send you back to Exodus. So pay attention to things that are repeated. But as far as movements, we break the scroll of Genesis up into four main movements. Not that that's definitive. We go, you have from Genesis 1 to 11 is a movement. And if you can read Genesis 1 through 11, you can read the whole story. I think most of the themes and patterns that we have in the rest of the scriptures come from that block. So
Wow.
that's movement one. Movement two is all about Abraham and his covenant and his narratives. And then you have a movement about Jacob. That's a big old block. And underneath that, you have portions about Isaac as well. And then the last movement is about Jacob. So you'll see these big old chunks in the narrative that are trying to set you up for who are the Israelites, what is God doing with them, what is their purpose, and where is the story going. And I
Hmm.
think if you kind of break up the text instead of just trying to read it linearly, if you understand these patriarchal narratives, I think it'll help have a better understanding of the meta narrative of Scripture.
Okay. And you said you said and mentioned that if you are able to read chapters 1 through 11, then you
Mm-hmm.
should be able to understand the key themes or be able to read the rest of the scriptures. When you
Mm-hmm.
say scriptures, are you referring to the Hebrew Bible only, or are you referring to even the New Testament as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean the New Testament as well,
Okay.
and that's because I think there I really this might be a harsh take, or not
Okay.
a harsh
I'll
take,
tell you if you're wrong.
a hot take. Please do tell me if I'm wrong. um, I really don't think that the New Testament can exist without the Hebrew Bible,
Mm,
but the New Testament brings to light things that the Hebrew Bible was hinting at, or
yeah.
was inkling forward toward, or was okay. Here's how I summarize it. I'll just say this. I think the Hebrew Bible develops a silhouette of a coming figure who will fulfill all types of roles. They will be the seed of the woman. They will be the one to bring Abraham's covenant to the full. They'll sit on David's throne. We know this figure as the Messiah figure, but that's only slight of it though. There's other titles, or there'll be the prophet like Moses, or the ultimate high priest. There's a silhouette, and then the New Testament fills in that silhouette with the person of Jesus from Nazareth. They go, this is who we've all been waiting for. And so I have no choice but to think of them as one. But yeah, I would say it's for the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament.
Okay. Cool. All right then. Well, then if we go back all the way then to the beginning, Genesis
Yeah,
1,
yeah.
uh, how do you think that the creation narrative in Genesis 1 and 2, how
Hmm.
does that set up the entire rest of the narrative for what we're going to encounter in the rest of the scroll?
Yeah. It's a good question, man. Well, for one, excuse me. For one, I think Genesis 1 and 2 are two different takes on the same creation narrative. Sorry, my throat is all dry.
You're
Excuse
all
me.
good.
I'm recovering from a cold, y'all.
No problem.
I think there's two takes on the same creation story. So Genesis 1 starts off with way too much water.
Wait.
It's nothing but chaos, water, and darkness. And then Genesis 2 starts off with not enough water. It's a desert, and God has to bring water from the land. And so, I don't think Genesis 2 is a zoom in on day 6 of Genesis 1. I that's not my take personally, but I'm not anti that. Um, but I think Genesis 1 is communicating God brings order from chaos. And that's a theme that will keep being repeated throughout the rest of the biblical story. And I think Genesis 2 is setting up that humans are designed, one, to be in intimate relationship with God, but also to be his priest. Because Adam is tasked, he says, I want you to work and keep the garden. The only other time you see that phrase is with the priest. In
Mhm.
Numbers, I believe, with the tabernacle. You're going to work and keep the tabernacle. And so Adam is kind of like a proto priest. And then his wife will come into the picture. And what does it mean to be a priest? You are interceding on behalf of everybody else. But it's not about superiority or anything like that. But humans are designed to be intercessors for creation, um, on behalf of God. And so priesthood is something you'll see get repeated over and over and over and over again throughout the text. So I would say those are two main themes that I think sets up for the rest of the scriptures. Versus us zooming in and being like, all right, is this literal? Is this
Yeah.
historical? Is this scientific? What about the dinosaurs? And it's like, man, we could talk all day about the dinosaurs, but I don't think that's the point of Genesis 1. And we
Yeah.
can get into the whole nitty gritty of like, did God really create a woman from the side of the man? And did he really create humans from the ground? It's like, you can get into all of those arguments. But I think at the basis, it's about the wisdom that is on repeat. So
Hmm.
God is creating order out of chaos, and humans are his mediators in a way to creation that will ultimately get fulfilled in Jesus. So
Hmm.
those are two ways that I think set up
Yeah.
for the rest of the story.
Yeah. So you would say that if people were to ask the question, oh well, well, let me say this. I constantly heard growing up the idea that we would call creation ex nihilo, which is
Mm,
just Latin for out of nothing,
mm,
right? And so it's kind of the way that you always perceive it growing up is that, oh, the Bible in Genesis 1 and 2 is communicating how God creates something out of nothing.
mm.
Um, and then you read the Bible, and then you realize that's not really what it says.
Yeah,
Uh, and what you're saying is that whether or not that's actually what happened,
yeah,
that's not really the point. It doesn't seem like what the biblical authors are trying to communicate, at least.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because they wrote within their cultural context. And so they're surrounded by Egyptians, they're surrounded by Babylonians and Mesopotamians and all these other folks in the ancient Near East. And they all have creation stories that begin with nothing but water. So we're like, okay, what do you do with that? That's
Yeah.
like their ancient conception of nothingness because it doesn't have a function. And so water and darkness represented chaos to them. And so in these other creation stories though, the gods are at war with one another, or they have intimate relations with one another and produce other gods, or one god rips the other, and that's how we get the skies above and the waters below. And in the Israelite story, they're just like, nah, like our God just spoke and
Hmm.
things came. He didn't have to go to war with anybody. It was, first of all, it was just him. And he didn't have to go to war. He didn't have to, procreate with another divine being. He just spoke and things came to be. So it's like a polemic, kind of like taking a shot at all these other ancient Near Eastern stories versus it being like, yeah, there was just ex nihilo. Like that, that's not a conception to their mind,
Yeah.
um, at least in their cultural context. So
Yeah.
again, if that's what literally happened, who knows? But they thought that the Earth was like a snow globe, bro. Like you have the dome, and above the dome you got waters above, and that the land was flat. That's what they believed. But
Yeah.
did God feel the need to correct them to be like, nah, there's not a whole bunch of water up here? No, because they're ancient people, and that's how ancient people thought, and that's okay. Versus
Yeah.
us, we got NASA now. You know what I'm saying? So like,
We're way smarter.
we
We got it all figured out, man.
we got it all figured out, right? So yeah, man, I no longer get into debates about those
Yeah.
type of things, even though those conversations are intriguing and they
Mhm.
can be helpful. But an ancient Israelite will look at us and be like, "What are y'all talking about?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Okay, if this is too much of a rabbit hole, let me know because we don't have
No,
to go
let's
too
do it.
deep into
Come
this.
on, before
But
you even ask, let's do it.
I want to get your thoughts. Because this is also something that growing up was so consistently repeated to me.
Mm,
Is when we would read, I think it's the first account in Genesis 1,
okay.
where you get kind of um, this insight into this conversation that's happening with the
Mm,
divine, or that the narrative has some type, or the author has some type of behind the scenes on, or whatever you would call it. But
mm-hmm,
it's the line where we're told that it says, "Let us go down and make mankind in our image and in
mm,
our likeness."
mm-hmm,
And the thing I consistently heard growing up was, "Oh, it's in the plural because it's the Trinity."
mm,
It's in the
mm-hmm,
plural because there's the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and they're talking to each other,
mm,
and they're just making sure they're on the same page, or something like
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
therefore, boom, Trinity's real, no argumentation needed.
Mm.
But then, I've encountered guys like Dr. Michael Heiser,
Rest in
who
peace.
did a lot of work in that field, trying to make it known that's not why that line is in
Mm,
there. It's not really what's trying to be communicated.
mm,
And I was curious what you thought, and if you could help
yeah,
us understand if that is talking about the Trinity, or if not, what is it actually talking about?
yeah. I think there's a valid argument for both cases of it being Father, Son, Spirit, or it being about God announcing with the divine council.
Okay.
Um,
The what is
because
that? Help us. Help us.
oh, that's a rabbit hole. I will try to give a little quick summary, but if you are interested, y'all, I would advise you and encourage you to tap into the late Dr. Michael Heiser's work. Unseen Realm, any of his stuff is it'll throw you for a loop, but in a good way.
Okay.
Um, but the divine council is God is the chief. It's Chief Elohim. Elohim is the Hebrew word that we have for God or gods. Uh, but it's a class of being. It's not a name. So like we know God ain't a name. It's a class of beings. So there are Elohims, right? And the spiritual beings is probably just a better way to say this. But the chief and supreme, the most high spiritual being is Yahweh or Adonai. And below him are these other spiritual beings. We know them as angels, the cherubim, the seraphim, the sons of God, the Satan figure, and the demonic figures. These are all spiritual beings that seem to have some presence within this type of, I wouldn't say like a courtroom. That's probably a bad analogy, but it's like a gathering of all these spiritual beings. And God is like, all right, yo, I'm about to do something. So he could be like, hey, let us make humankind in our image. The us is not saying, okay, you guys are going to create with me. It's
Uh-huh.
more of an announcement like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. But it's the same way that you would host a party and you'd be like, all right, y'all, let's do this.
Mhm.
But you might be the one actually initiating and doing the thing. Let's play a game, y'all. Um,
Mhm.
but you're the one that's organizing the game, setting it up, explaining the instructions, yada yada yada. You are doing the action. And so God is the creator, but he's making an announcement to all the spiritual beings who are present on the scene. And um, the spiritual beings, Michael Heiser, he argues that the spiritual beings also are made in God's image too, but in a different way, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that is an argument, and that is something to consider. And he provides some pretty heavy evidence for it. So
Yeah.
I would say dive into his work. I don't want to chop it up, but
Yeah.
he's not alone in that thought. I'm blanking on another scholar that I read who hinted at that, but I would say he's the most prominent that we know. So
Mhm.
I think you could argue both ways. It's still,
Yeah.
I think both are still faithful to claiming that God is the creator and that He alone is the creator. So that's my take.
Okay. Okay. There you go. Thanks for answering my really yeah, my question that probably yeah, we ended up being all right. I thought it was going to take us into a deep rabbit hole,
No,
but
we
you
good.
ended up
We good.
bringing us out of it before it got too got too crazy.
Hey man.
Um, okay, so we've talked about creation a little bit. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the fall. What
Yeah.
are some things that are highlighted in that portion that we need to know if we're reading through?
Yeah. Well, I would actually say there are multiple quote unquote falls. I think Genesis 3 is the first of them. I think Genesis 6 is another one, and I think Genesis 11 is another fall of a
Okay.
sense. But particularly with Genesis 3, the roles that are played, you have a deceiver figure, you have these humans who are tested by God, and they're being trapped by this Satan figure or this serpent figure, um, and they make a bad decision. The theme of testing is everywhere in the scriptures, even to Jesus himself, where he will be tested in a garden,
Mm,
and he will have to navigate. But he is the second Adam that Paul likes to call, and he triumphs over the test. And it's not like God is like, all right, let me test y'all to give you an A, B, C, or D or F, and if you fail, like it's all over. The testing imagery is more so about revealing what's inside of a person. It's like putting gold through fire. It's like, let me test how pure this gold actually is. Um, and so God gives them an opportunity. What is the opportunity? There's a scholar named John Walton. He has this whole Lost World series. And he says something that struck me. And I think he's onto something. The the opportunity is that the humans can become immortal. Like God. I don't think Adam and Eve are naturally immortal in the garden because there's the tree of life there. What does that represent? It represents God's divine life. So humans can participate and become like him in the sense of having eternal life. But they have one restriction to maintain life in the garden with God. And that's, yo, don't eat of this tree. But it's not because of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad is some magic tree by any chance. It's the decision that's made that they go, nah, we're gonna go about things on our own way. And so God is like, if this is how you will live, I can't have you in the garden anymore because I don't want you to be stuck like this forever. But with that said, think about all of the folks who come later on who are deceivers, who fit the snake fly, who fit the snake slot. Abraham will deceive, Isaac will deceive. Isaac will repeat the same thing that his dad did. When his dad is like, yo, this is my sister, that's not my wife. Abraham does it twice.
mm,
And then Isaac will do the same thing with his wife, Rebecca. She's my sister, that's not my wife. With one of the same kings that Abraham did it with. So it's like, bro. So deception, Jacob, and we're going through the patriarchs right now. This is just in Genesis.
mhm,
Jacob, he's called the heel grabber. That's a play on the whole thing about the seed of the woman who will crush the head of the serpent. But Jacob is a trickster. He's a deceiver. He deceives his own father into giving him the birthright that belonged to his dad. He tries to manipulate his situations with his uncle Laban after Uncle Laban deceives him. Like it's all of this deception themes that just get repeated and repeated. But it started with the snake, and so the option is: do you want to be a descendant of the woman, or do you want to be a descendant of the snake?
mm,
And a human can choose which line that they want to be a part of, because Eve will give birth to two sons in Genesis chapter 4, and Cain will prove himself to become a child of the snake because he chooses the way of death and destruction and murder, which is the intent of the snake, while Abel is a true seed of the woman, and then that goes to Seth or what have you. So you have that, but then you have testing, right? Going back to that. Um, who isn't tested in the scriptures?
mm,
Name somebody who isn't being tested of their trust in God. You
yeah.
want to talk about Job? You want to talk about You know what I'm saying? Like, who we gonna name? You want to talk about David? You want to talk about Solomon? Want to talk about want to talk about Naomi? Talking about Ruth's mother-in-law? We can name anybody. Most of them, as far as I've read, I could be ignorant. Most of them have a moment where testing comes up because that's a pervasive theme to the point where it even goes to Jesus, who has to face the deceiving snake himself and overcomes the test. And
Mm-hmm.
now he is not only offering eternal life, he is the essence of what the tree of life represented. So when he's on the cross, just like the trees in the garden were in the middle of the garden, he's in the middle of two crosses.
Mm.
And just like there's a river of life that flowed from the tree of life in the garden, when his side gets pierced, it's blood and water that spills out, which is the river. It is by his blood that we are purified. It is by his blood that we now have life. He is the river of life. So it's all. Am I making sense? I feel like
Yeah,
I'm rambling.
yeah, yeah,
It's it's all not just symbolic, but the point of the gospels, what these authors are trying to do is frame Jesus in a way that points him back to these narratives of old.
yeah.
And not just the Genesis narratives, obviously. We're talking
Yeah.
Moses, we're talking David, all of that stuff. But it's key. That's where the story begins. So Jesus has to redeem all of that. And now you and I get to participate in uh, being a part of the tree of life, bro. Because Jesus says, I'm the true vine and you are the branches. What are we the branches of? The images of a tree.
Yeah.
So now we get to be a part. When we join and become unified with him, we get to be a part of the tree of life. And now we get to offer, um, invite others to join and partake in the eternal life that Jesus offers. And he says, you test a tree by its fruit. If you know you'll be a part of the tree of life based on the fruit that you producing, come on, bro. I'm just saying, dog. It's all over, bro. Like, that's all I'm saying. So I would say Genesis 3 is very important um, for those thematic things to trace throughout the scriptures. Pay attention to who's deceiving, pay attention to who's being tested, and pay attention if they're trusting God's wisdom or if they're going about things on their own. And
Mm-hmm.
you'll see those things pop up everywhere.
Yeah.
Real quick, let me just do this nerd moment.
Come on.
Uh, here's an immediate recycle. So when God tells the humans about the consequences, He says, "Okay, bringing forth children is going to be difficult. Bringing forth crops from the land is going to be difficult." What is the same consequence that Cain now receives? It's the same thing after he kills his brother. It's the same thing that Adam gets. It's going to be hard to bring forth crops from the land. Genesis 5, when it goes from Adam to Noah, Noah's dad goes, Noah's going to bring comfort. His name means rest,
Mm.
or it can mean comfort. Comfort for us from the labor and the painful toil because God cursed the ground. And now, then we get the whole flood thing, which is a decreation. The waters that got separated above and below, above that, the snow globe, the
Mm.
dome, they now come crashing back down. But God still provides a dry land where humans and animals reside in the same place in peace. It's like a mini uh, Garden of Eden on a boat, right? Excuse me. And then Noah will come off the boat. He will plant a vineyard. He's planting like another garden, and then he partakes of the fruit because he gets drunk off of the vineyard stuff. And what
Wow.
happens? He gets naked.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Which is it leads to something shameful in the tent. Whatever happened, something went down. But the idea of being naked is replaying the nakedness that the humans recognized and they felt shame over after they ate from the fruit. It's
Mm.
the same stuff over and over and over again.
Man.
And so that was just a little nerd bit I had to throw in
Yeah. Dang. Okay, just summarize the whole Bible for us, why don't you? Yeah.
there.
There we go. I don't even have any more questions to ask because you just gave it
listen,
all to us. Nah.
listen, man. I'm so sorry for the coughing, by the way.
No, you're all right. You're all right. Yeah. Okay. So then I want to talk about too, because you mentioned um, we, the humans. decide to define good and evil on their own terms, right? They
Right.
take the fruit, they eat of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
The God gives the repercussions of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
By cursing the ground, um, and then they're exiled. They're
Yeah.
exiled from the garden.
Yeah.
What is the significance, I'm wondering, then, of throughout the rest of the biblical narrative of this pattern of exile, this pattern of
Mm.
being released or kicked out of the presence of God?
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, one could argue that the garden story sets up the story of Israel, because again, sorry, I'm just gonna keep beating the drum with the garden story.
Yeah.
I think it's so important, clearly, but God presents them with an opportunity. You can have life, and life abundant, and I will bless you. You will have everything you need. I'm talking about the humans in the garden. Or if you disobey my command, my instruction, it will lead to death. And so, what else is God presenting before the Israelites in Leviticus 26, I think? And then in Deuteronomy 28, when he says, when Moses, God through Moses is saying, hey, I present to you life and death. Here's all of the blessings that God will bring upon you if you obey his instructions. And if you don't, it will lead to death and chaos and exile. And so when the humans in the garden disobey God's instructions, they are exiled to the east of the garden. And that's the direction. And by the end to Genesis 11, they'll end up in a place called Babel, which is Babylon. So going towards the east in exile is not good. But then when we think about the Israelites, towards the end of the Hebrew Bible, they don't obey the instructions. And what happens? They get exiled to the east. Where do they go?
Mm,
Obviously, you got the north who's captured by Assyria, but then you have the southern kingdom who later becomes known as the Judeans or the Jews. They get exiled to Babylon. So it's like the garden story is Israel's story at the same time. The tree of the knowledge of good and bad, whose wisdom will you go by? Will you go by your own, or will you go by the wisdom that God has given you?
mm,
Like, I don't think God was being stingy with wisdom in the garden. It's not like he's like, I want y'all to be stupid. He's like, I will teach you what is good and what is bad. Obviously, this isn't directly in the text, but this is something I think you can infer. I will lead you to what is good and what's bad. You just have to trust me, or you can go about this your own way. And that's the same situation with Israel. Will they trust God? As we see in the wilderness, man, they're like, man, it's dry out here. I'm thirsty. Where the water at, bro? Or we hungry. You brought us out here just to kill us. It was better in Egypt. We had garlic and we had leeks. I don't even know what leeks are, but I know it's some type of vegetable, I think. Like, we had leeks, we had it all. It was better back there. So we see just throughout the Torah, yeah, they don't trust God, but he keeps giving them opportunities. And it's new tree moments. Will you trust now? And there's a moment, bro, where God, I believe God tells Israelites to send some spies into the promised land ahead of time, and there's 12 of them that go. And they bring back, I think they bring back a branch with fruit on it or something like that. But it's the words that are in that story are Garden of Eden language. It's trying to show that this is a new Garden of Eden land.
mm.
But they don't trust God eventually, and so they end up getting kicked out of it. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, man, like Adam and Eve's story is Israel's story. It's Jesus's story. It's our story. Um,
Yeah.
it is the human condition. We have an opportunity to taste true life, and will we go about things our way, or will we trust the things that God has put forth for us to follow for our flourishing?
Mm,
So I would say that it's very essential, man. But regardless, God can always bring order out of chaos, which is what I think Genesis 1 is communicating in addition to the garden story. So no
yeah.
matter what happened with Israel, God always brought order out of their chaos. No matter what happened to Jesus, he always brought order out of his chaos. No matter what happens with us, God always brings order out of our chaos. even if it's not in the immediate. So there's that little preacher
There it
moment,
is. Yeah,
huh?
man. No, Hakeem, that's good. That's good. Here, let me ask you this actually. Well, let me set up the scene. Okay,
Yeah,
so sometimes before I go have these conversations,
yeah,
I talk to my wife and I ask her if she has any questions
yeah,
as well about the topic that we're talking about. Just because
yeah,
our brain works so differently,
yeah,
I am way more technical, way more focused on the academic approach, whatever it is, and she is just the way that she thinks is it's just like I don't even know if there's a word or term for it to explain it, but it's just
yeah,
so much different than mine, and it's so
mm,
needed, and it's so I think it's
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah,
She has this awesome childlike wonder and faith, and she's just extremely curious about all these different things.
yeah,
And we were talking the other day specifically about the fall or the first fall, if you will, in
mm,
Genesis 3,
mm,
and the humans being exiled out of the garden, but then the
yeah,
cherubim being
yeah,
placed with the
yeah,
flaming swords.
yeah.
And we were talking, and I had mentioned that I had mentioned to her that Eden was a specific place that in the garden. So it's like the idea, right, that God creates and forms the world, and then
Yeah.
in that He plants a garden, and then correct me if I'm wrong, but is it in that He plants Eden, or He puts the humans or that are outside the garden, or what's the?
So Eden, there's the dry land in general, and
Uh-huh.
then Eden is the region, and then he plants the garden in Eden.
Okay, got
Yeah, yeah. He puts the garden in Eden, and he actually makes the man outside of the garden, and then
yeah.
he puts him in the garden. So that's the setup.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about that, and then her immediate question was, she was like, "Okay, well, if Eden's a real place, well, one, the first question she thought was, does it still exist?
Mm, mm,
And if it does exist,
yeah.
say we found it, would the cherubim still be there with the flaming swords? And
Yeah.
if I tried to walk in, would I die? That was her,
Yeah.
would I be slaughtered? Is her question. So, do you have an answer for us?
Yo, first of all, that question is so important. It's something that I've wondered too, where I'm like,
Really?
so where is the garden? And how come ain't nobody, get sliced up at the sword? Um, let me preface it by saying this. Do I think there is truth to this story in like a what we will call literal history?
Mm,
Sure. Do I think that there are humans that we have descended from, all of us? Absolutely. But I think the Garden of Eden story is not video camera footage of
yeah.
something in the past. I think it's an ancient Israelite way of talking about why are we the way that we are and what the heck is going on. Um, so, is there a place that we can go find that has cherubim currently? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's just me.
Yeah.
And that's not to say, oh, we can't trust the scriptures because X, Y. That's not saying that. Um, but I have heard there's an argument that the promised land is set on analogy to the Garden of Eden.
Mm.
That the Garden of Eden would have been somewhere in the promised land or somewhere in Mesopotamia. I've heard somewhere in Ethiopia. I've heard a couple of theories, but I don't think there's a place we can
Yeah.
go to now where
Yeah.
find these.
You know what I just thought of too
Yeah,
as you were speaking.
yeah,
I'm just playing along. I'm just going with the hypotheticals here.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you know how there's the word picture that's given to us is or at least how it's described, right, is that in tabernacle there's the sketching or how would you call it? Like the
yeah,
embroidery
yeah.
isn't that what it's called? Yeah.
Yep.
Embroidery of the cherubim in the front of the tent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever Jesus was it when he was crucified, or I think it was when he was crucified, right? The veil was torn, right,
Mm-hmm.
top to bottom. Therefore, the embroidery of the cherubim was done away with. It was split. So there's no
Yeah.
longer these flaming swords when you enter into the holy of holies, his presence of
Yep.
God. And
Yep.
so I thought I was like, okay, but what if in Eden as well the cherubim were done away with? So
Hey.
therefore you like going on your route is like, okay, the theory of it may be the promised land type deal.
Mm.
Well, I don't know if that fits. Anyways, I'm just blabbing,
No,
but
I'm
that was
with
the
you.
thought I had.
I'm with you. And when Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life,"
Mm-hmm.
No one comes to the Father except through me. I think that's Garden of Eden language
Mm.
because it talks about how the way to the tree of the garden, how the way was blocked by the cherubim,
Yeah.
and it's the way to the tree of life. And we outside of the garden, metaphorically speaking, right, or literally, whatever you want to say,
Yeah.
um, we have been subjugated to the lies of the snake and the lies of his ways, and we need somebody who can lead us back into the garden with truth. And so when Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," no one comes to the Father except through me. It's a claim that he's the one he is the way back into the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes through the sword for us though. When he
Yeah.
offers his life, he goes through the sword. But he's not dead at the gate anymore. Like he's alive. And so he can go, "Come on, y'all. The sword is gone. Come back in. You just have to come through me now." It's no longer these angelic figures who will kill you
Kill you. Yeah.
if you try, but I've offered my life. And I think the ascension of Jesus is really crucial in our theology because in Hebrews it talks about when Jesus ascends into the heavenly tabernacle, the heavenly temple, he offers his blood before the Father. He's doing this high priest thing. So he
Mm.
sprinkles it. And so he's going through it. The whole analogy of offering one's life, um, because the temple and tabernacle are set on analogy to the garden too. It's the same setup as you were hinting at. It's all the same thing. In order to get to the holy of holies, you got to go through the cherubim. And
Mm-hmm.
if the high priest didn't do things as he ought to, it would have killed him.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus is the ultimate high priest who goes in on our behalf, offers his life, offers his own blood, so that we now may have full access back to the tree of life. And that's what we'll partake in, as Revelation hints at. We'll go back to the garden. Now it's just a garden city,
Yeah.
New
Yeah.
Jerusalem. So
Good.
we're going back. Um, but yeah, where is Eden? I don't know, man.
We don't know. We don't know.
I don't
Somewhere.
know. I don't know.
I'm making my life mission to find it. How about that?
Come on, bro. You got time. Come on. We got
That's awesome.
GPSs now, bro. That's all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, no. What happens if I type that into Apple Maps? What
Garden of Eden.
happens?
So we'll
That's
see.
awesome, dude. Yeah,
Indeed.
well, I know we're coming up on an hour.
Hmm.
Is there any concluding remarks that you want to make as, listeners maybe are feeling really inspired now to go journey through the scroll of Genesis to
Yeah.
learn what, a lot of the things that we've been talking about and then go into other portions of the Bible and learn how it connects and
Yeah.
whatnot. Is there any concluding words that you maybe didn't touch on or that you just want to bring to remembrance as we close up?
Yeah. I would say, based on one more narrative, it's the Cain and Abel story, right? I think one of the main messages is about conflict between siblings,
Mm,
um, which is something you see in the rest of the scriptures. You see right after it gets repeated with Noah's sons. Um, Shem and Japheth are at odds with Ham after the tent situation. Um, Even Abraham and his nephew Lot, they're
mm,
not brothers, but they call each other brothers in Genesis 13. It's like, hey, let us not fight. We're brothers. So you'll go your way, I'll go my way. After their herdsmen and such get into it,
mm-hmm.
Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob, Esau, Joseph and his older brothers, and then it just repeats, right? And even when you get into Exodus, like Moses is a descendant of Shem, the son of Noah, and Pharaoh is a descendant of Ham. And these are brotherly conflicts. The Israelites and the Egyptians. That's all the Cain and Abel narrative on repeat. Even up, and it just cycles over and over and over again up until Jesus, who's at odds with his brothers, both the ones who are named like James, Joseph, Jude, and all of them. But with the Pharisees, they are his kin, or the Sadducees, they are his kin. The scribes, they are his kin, and they're at odds. And so I think the wisdom for us as people who are trying to follow this way of life is be mindful of your conflict with your brothers and sisters. And it happens with the women too. Like the wives of Jacob, they're at odds with each other. Rachel and Leah. Like it's not just a brother thing. It's a brother, it's a sister and sister or brother and sister. Um, But I think there's something we can learn in the church in our modern day, and I don't care what tradition of church you find yourself in. Um, we do a lot of bashing one another online. We do a lot of talking behind one another's backs. We do a lot of this stuff, and I just want to say, be mindful, because just like God warned Cain, hey, you have an opportunity to do good still, but sin is crouching at the door, and its
Mm.
desire is to have you, but you can rule over it. Um, I think that same warning is for us. Sin is crouching at the door, wanting to overtake us as we are in conflict with one another. And if we're not careful, it could lead to a type of murder in our hearts that Jesus talks about. So I would say these texts have wisdom that matter today. Um, I think the way forward is based on these ancient wisdom texts. And so take your time. It's meant to be deep wells. I'm learning a lot. I hope to keep learning a lot and never to stop learning. Um, and the invitation is open for anybody who will want to journey along. So that's it, y'all. Thanks for letting me blabber in y'all ear for 55 minutes, though.
Dude, thank you so much for joining me. Seriously.
Absolutely, man.